ASSAf, recognizing the importance of AI, started a series of AI webinars last year to discuss current developments and issues around AI, and also to reflect on the impact of AI on science as well as society. There were 3 webinars held in 2024, and this is the second AI webinar that's being held this year. AI is increasingly enhancing human capability. So this has given rise to what is currently being referred to as human-centered AI systems in the AI community. But elsewhere, it's also been explored more broadly as assistive technologies, specifically in the human-computer interface community. One of the key questions around this topic is whether humans can and will ever form deep emotional bonds with these AI bots that are appearing. While there are many important ethical issues around this, differences in culture and attitude towards technology play an important part. This technology as AI companions has been around for many years, and I'm just going to give you an example of this. So one of the earlier places where AI companions came about was in Japan. And this was around 2016 with a product called the Gatebox Virtual Home Assistant. So this takes the form of a projected 3D character living inside a hologram, living inside a glass tube. The developers originally developed it for smart home applications, but the primary demand was actually emerged from, strangely enough, lonely Japanese men seeking companionship. So I'm just going to show you one of the promotional videos about Gatebox to give you an idea of where this technology was in 2017, which I'm just going to share with you. Second. So this just gives you an idea of an AI companion. So in Japan, for example, it was in 2018, there was a marriage by a Japanese man to one of these kind of virtual pop singers, Japanese pop singers. And according to Gatebox, there's been over 3,000 cross-dimensional marriage certificates issued. So of course, this is controversial and can evoke strong reactions from different people. But I think this is just shows the difference in cultures. So of course, it'll be interesting to explore how something like this would be viewed in South Africa. So on that note, I think it's time to hand over to Dr. Martin Bekker, who will introduce the speakers and take us through the topic of the webinar. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Deshen. That's provocative and interesting. Louise, can you confirm that I'm visible and audible?
Yes, you are. But your voice, son, is this Martin's voice fine to you?
Say that again.
Yes, I think it's fine, Martin. I'll put my hand up if necessary.
Super, thank you. So welcome everybody, and this is, as Deshen said, the fifth installment in this series where we've looked at a whole range of AI-related ideas. We asked ourselves, have we reached a peak, or is it just beginning? Can we use this in academics? Can our students use this, or is this a form of doping, academic doping? We've looked at various ethical questions in terms of inclusivity, in terms of bringing languages on board. We've had discussions around the gender dimension of that. And now we've got this idea of agents moving closer to us. Deshen rightly said that there's an interesting cultural divide between South Africa and other countries. That's true, but there's also a big shift right now. And I think that's what we're trying to come to terms with and evaluate, because we're seeing a lot of movement at the moment, and certainly our speakers, I think, will help us reflect on that. So we've got ideas around academic aids. Some of the audience might be familiar with Sapio Elaine, the General AI Lab Assistant. There was the fairly well-received paper by Rhodes and Rhodes on custom digital assistants for their labs. We had John himself writing about, John Symons, we'll see a bit later, about new kinds of social agency. We've got Jeremy Howick over from Oxford writing about the empathy imitation game. We've got lots of examples of the Pepper robot, the SoftBank, then taken over by Aldebaran, with robots in the classroom helping autistic children, mostly in the UK. Peppers and care homes as well. And in the interest of full disclosure, we did reach out to that company and to former employees of Aldebaran and SoftBank, and they respectfully declined to participate in this conversation. But we've had lots, Shannon Valor writing about the ethics of care bots and caregivers, the moral values, specifically looking at ethics of care. And then in my own teaching, we used to, and I saw a little bit earlier that John had something on that, so I won't give too much away. But we dealt with influencers, in other words, social media personalities using their avatars, their likeness based on text records, turning themselves into virtual partners, virtual girlfriends, and you pay per minute, $1 or so. And quite interestingly, that, well, I've had to adjust the question that I set or the task that I set to my engineering students because there's one of those specific applications has recently, relatively recently, gone spectacularly rogue. We're going to explore the uses, the interesting cases, what's next, what is around the corner in terms of applications, probably linked onto, say, GraphRag, but we're also going to ask a few philosophical questions today. Our format is the same as we've had throughout this series. So we will have a short presentation by each of our speakers. After that, the speakers will engage among themselves. So they'll have questions of clarification, points of difference, certainly to bring forward. And then after that, we open the floor. However, to everyone here, please make use of the chat function in the meantime. If you want to bottle and store a question for a specific presenter, interlocutor, do so by all means. But make use of the hive mind that we have in this this wonderful space. So drop a question in the chat, and speakers and members from the audience will participate and say what they think. And we've seen that that's quite a rich forum as well. So please do engage as soon as there's something that you find interesting, something that you want to take issue with. I'm going to move on straight away to our first speaker. Now that's Werner Stucky. He's CEO of Stubber Incorporated. The engineers, my colleagues, would call him an industry expert. His company has a pan-African reach where they do essentially AI-driven business innovation. Now, we've seen quite a few companies say they do AI and then it's just regressions in the back end, but it sounds fashionable. This is not that kind of a AI innovation. This is proper automation of processes, and his work in including large language models have led him and his company to develop and deploy a whole bunch of chatbots as well, with some really interesting results. So Werner, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to hearing from your discoveries, your learnings, and your insights.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can.
I think the host needs to enable my video there. Doesn't seem like I can start.
I will do so quickly.
Okay, and then I'm just sharing my slides there. So can everyone see the slides?
Yes, they're rendering on our side.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Yeah, so maybe just to kick it off, this is one of my favorite movies from 1974 by Jamie Ace, Animals Are Beautiful People. And it shows animals doing all sorts of fascinating things, reminding us that they can also have personalities and have uniqueness between individuals. And, just causes delight watching this movie. And I think this is a good title for my presentation, because I think AIs are beautiful people too. They exhibit personalities, show uniqueness, and we've seen a lot of where these large language model conversations cause delight in people. And so, yeah, I can speak on a lot of technical things as well, but I thought for this presentation, I'd focus on maybe one aspect. So we primarily work with large language models, and we did our first large-scale deployment in South Africa in October 2023. So we were still dealing with 8,000 tokens, and yeah, this increasing token length, I think, is going to just increase the complexity of the scale and the scale of tasks we can give to LLMs to do. But since then, we've done over 3.5 million conversations on the platform. And so I've seen a lot of conversations, and I've seen a lot of really interesting interactions between customers and the business they're interacting with. And so I thought I'd focus on a very controversial point is, do you tell the participant that they're chatting to an AI or not? So yeah, do we and myself particularly, I always advocate at our customers not to reveal that it's an AI. So a bit of a cowboy, and I tell them, give it a human name, just introduce, say, hi, I'm John, how can I assist you? And just do the work, just assist the customer. And there's a few reasons for this, and I'm going to go into some of the things we've observed. But I think technology works best when it just disappears into the background. Technology that really works, you don't notice it. It just doesn't pop out at you. And there's another reason we sort of advocate for this, is that the previous crop of bots that people encountered on websites and on WhatsApp, they were very deterministic and sort of decision tree based. And they were frankly horrible. And people have got these bad experiences that you want to try and get them away from that. So we see a lot of differences in our customers that take our advice and just, pretend they're human, or the customers that whose compliance departments spoil the fun for us. So this is one example. So we do a lot of integration with WhatsApp, and this is probably like a insurance agent assisting a customer, and you might get something like please describe the incident, and the customer will respond with like very terse language if they think it's a virtual or an AI. And when you ask when incidents occur, they give very discrete pieces of information, and they do something like a to, for example. But if you do not reveal that it's an AI, you get much more natural conversation. So I just want to show the difference. We see in customers that don't say it's a virtual agent, we see people resulting to voice notes just naturally, because they just they understand that would be able to be used by a human, and so they give much more detailed descriptions. They'll also use relative terms, so saying yesterday instead of the actual date, and they would just use natural conversational type language off the bat. They'd also just respond, like sometimes they'd switch languages, and the LLMs nowadays just handle languages just in their stride. And so you actually just get a much richer experience off the bat. And so this is why we advocate for this. This is an actual response that we once got on one of the conversations. And look, the irony is not lost on me that somebody saying my faith in humanity has been restored to an AI. But I think this is what we can get back to. I think this is what we've lost in business. We've moved away from this. When I signed up for a bank account, I went to my bank manager in the town I grew up in, and I had a conversation. It was a conversational business interaction, and cost has driven this way of servicing customers and handling customers like down to that there's no more conversation in business. There's no more humans doing business with humans anymore. And I think large language models can get us back there. It won't be humans doing business with humans anymore, but it will be doing business in a human way, which is conversational. And I think this conversational way, the conversational interface, the impact of a conversational interfaces will be huge. So some more observations of what we've seen with this technology is that when we put a web chat or any kind of conversational interface, a web pop-up on a website, the number of people that actually drill down and go to the rest of the website falls, because people will default to the path of least resistance always. Humans are very dependable that way. And if you give them a conversational interface, they will always default to that, over apps, over portals, over forms. It's just a natural way that humans engage. And so this is an example of literally something we saw in live environments, where the web chat was overlaid over a part of a website that literally had the call center number. And we got so many people just asking what the call center number was on the web chat above the actual information, because they just narrowed in on just a conversational interface. These conversational interfaces are so good at the moment that they are really better than your run-of-the-mill human in a call center conversation, to the point that that I'd propose that there's an anti-Turing test. And like in the original Turing test, the goal was to see, could you get a computer to respond and speak, at the level of a human? But at this point, the anti-Turing test basically does the opposite, right? The responses and the feedback back from the computer is so good, it cannot be a human. It surpassed the level of imitating a human. We definitely see this even with a lot of our customers, where they take our advice and not reveal that it is a virtual assistant. We see them even wanting to go a step further, where they tell us, could you please delay the message speed because the LLM is responding too quickly. You need to put a little bit of a weight on that. Yeah, so with that, I think I've got a few stories that I can get into. Wait, let me just jump back. Yeah, I think I've flipped back to the video. Yeah, so just checking on my time there, how much time I've got left, but I've got quite a few stories as we've seen stuff in the wild. On one of our customers that's an internet service provider, we've seen an handling of angry customers, and we've seen one of the extreme cases. In ISP is a tough industry. We saw somebody relating to the large language model a problem and being highly irate, and they just continued to speak about the problem to the large language model, and it had the ability to open up a support ticket. And it essentially opened a support ticket, told the customer it's already done that, and he kept going on about the problem, and it ended up opening up 6 support tickets, which in retrospect had the correct effect, because this customer's priority moved up in the call center. But by the time the human called that person, he was calm. He'd been listened to. He'd had his issue really heard, like for more than 10 minutes actually, by the LLM. And I think at a certain point in the future, we will deem it cruel to have humans to have to do this task of listening to irate customers. This is only a task for large language models. They are way better than a human at that type of thing. I'm just watching my time. I've got many stories, but one of the other stories, which is quite interesting and a result of us taking this weird approach, is we built a truck salesman that operated on WhatsApp, and the contact got passed around in trucking circles. And we actually had someone on a Sunday evening start chatting to this agent. The agent quoted the customer, quoted their load that they needed for the truck, sent them the quote over email, and the customer responded, sending all their bank details to the AI agent with all their FICA docs. And on the Monday morning, the client called into the customer called into the dealership, very excited, saying that he just bought a truck from Aiden last night. He'd like to speak to Aiden. We had a great conversation, and the poor receptionist had to explain that it wasn't actually a human that he was speaking to. And I think that this is the level that's now reachable. And I think the question remains, is this a great way to do it, or is it a temporary way until people realize that virtual assistants are really on that level? So, yeah, I've got a few more stories, but I think I'm out of time.
Werner, thank you so much for that. Well, restoring our faith in humanity, or restoring our faith in really good coding. We're going to move on, but Werner, I see there's at least one question in the chat directed at you. So if you want to, you can already respond to that or leave that a little later, as you wish. We're going to move on to Jess Ress. Jess is lead data scientist at Discovery Health. She is, well, I have a t-shirt that says, I was into data before it was big. I think Jess was into natural language processing before it was big. And by extension, LLMs. So we're going to hear about lessons in building bots, GraphRag and the like. We really look forward to what you've got to teach us. Thanks, Jess.
Cool, thanks, Martin. Cool. Am I sharing correctly?
Yes, all good.
Cool. Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Jess. I work at Discovery Health, and we've been building systems using large language models in the space of customer service for the last couple of years. And yeah, today I just wanted to share a couple of the things that we've succeeded in and a couple of the lessons that we've learned along the way. It's maybe a little bit more technical than the previous presentation, so I hope it's not too much. But yeah, feel free to interrupt me if there are questions. Cool. So what my team is trying to build is an effective and safe question answering system for Discovery Health customer service. And what we've built and focused on up until now has been a system that's used internally, so by our 2,500 contact center staff when they're providing customer service. But we are also interested in seeing if we can put something in the hands of customers themselves. Obviously, this comes with its own risks and challenges. Some of you might have seen Discovery AI. So that's Discovery Bank's AI system for customer service in their space. This is quite separate from that. So this is a Discovery Health. And health is quite a lot more complex and has a lot more governance things that we need to be mindful of. So yeah, we're not live on the market yet. Cool. So super quick overview of how the system works. And don't worry, I'm not going to go super technical here, but we have a lot of documents that that have all of the information about how Discovery Health benefits and products work. Over 40,000 documents is how many we work with. Those form our knowledge base. And then we do some processing of those and we load them into a database. And for those familiar with the space, you might notice this is the start of a RAG or retrieval augmented generation pipeline, or graph RAG, which I'll get to in a second. So we do some clever stuff with LLMs to get to our database representation of all of the knowledge that is needed to answer questions about Discovery Health. Then when a query comes in, and as I mentioned, for now, I'll consider our users as the contact center staff themselves. The query comes in, we need to do some input guardrailing to make sure this is an appropriate query. And then we have what we call our triage LLM, which decides what information it needs to go and find to answer this question. And some of that comes from our content, like straight from the database. Some of it comes from tools we've had to design. So like logic for reading from Excel tables, for example. And some of it needs to come from the information about the customer themselves. We get all of the information that we need. We give that all to a large language model. We also have what we call our rewriter, which takes the outputs from the first LLM and just rewrites them to be really customer friendly and have the right tone and brand voice. We then have some output guarding to make sure that we're not doing anything appropriate or giving inappropriate responses there. And that finally gives us our answer. And then all of this comes together in a chat interface that I'm sure you're familiar with. So yeah, that's a quick overview. I want to do a quick demo of what it looks like. So this is like our test UI, basically. Unfortunately, I can't show you the real UI because it's been integrated into our actual systems. But it uses the same backend behind the scenes. And so I want to see if I have a good question saved here. Let's see, spectacles coverage on Classic Saver. So it's just saved because I've asked this question before. It's going to go and hit the real backend behind the scenes to see if we can answer this question correctly. So when the contact center agent asks a question, it gives the answer over here, saying that it's paid from the funds in the MSA with a 20% discount if you use an optometrist on the network. So that's the answer. It also has sources and references, so where it got the information, which is quite important for any validation or review, or just if someone wants to get more information. And then the users at the moment respond to all of these. So yeah, I'd be happy to try a couple of examples, but I don't want to waste anyone's time now. So if at the end anyone wants to try, we can. So yeah, this is a basic version. Obviously, you can see it's single turn, so one question, one answer. It's not conversational just yet. That's something we're working on. But yeah, you can see the overall functionality. So going back to what we have learned along the way, So firstly, something that has been a wind in our sails is that large language models and the technology and the community around them is just getting better and better over time. So at the moment, we have our 2,500 consultants using this tool, and our accuracy in terms of thumbs up rates is sitting at around 92%. The thumbs down rate is only 3%, and the difference is where we refuse to answer or we get it partially correct. And so, yeah, you can see from the graph at the bottom how this has improved over time. So since October, which is the start of the graph, until the end of May, we've gone from 70% to over 90% accurate. And that's a combination of the language models getting better over time and the design of our system making improvements. But where we've really just benefited from the large language models themselves is in terms of speed and cost. So the cost has dramatically gone down for the same kind of quality of large language model that we're using. You can see how that's just gone way down over the last 15 weeks. And response time is also going down, slightly less dramatically, but for the same quality of answer, or even better quality of answer, the LLMs are getting faster, which is really, really helpful for us. However, even for this, we think 6.5 seconds is not quite fast enough. So a lesson that we still need to learn is how do we speed this up, especially when we want to start bringing in more and more information. Lesson number 2 that we've learned is, yes, when you're building such a system, consider all the different options and do the science to interrogate them properly, but don't spend too long doing it. So for us, we had built a RAG, or retrieval augmented generation system, like I showed you, and we were getting around 80–85% accurate, and we weren't really happy with that yet. And so we decided to try graph RAG, which is another way of structuring the data behind the scenes into a knowledge graph structure and using that when you're querying it to feed into the language model later. So we wanted to try this, and yeah, I mean, I just wanted to nerd out over it because I think it's a really cool concept. But we spent 6 months kind of doing the comparison between RAG and graph RAG, amongst other things. And that was just, at the end of the day, a lot of wasted effort and time, not in trying it. I'm happy that we tried it, but that we took too long to get to a point of making a decision. At the end of the day, our decision was to proceed with using a RAG. It was more accurate, faster, and the cost was more knowable because the building of the graph, the rebuilding of the graph when data is updated, and for us that happens multiple times within a day. Excuse me, those were all better. The accuracy, speed, and cost were all better for the RAG. So I know Martin is very interested in graph RAG, and maybe some of the other speakers, so I'm very interested to hear their thoughts on this and the success they may have had. But it didn't work for us. I'm still not 100% sure why. I think it's because our information is not inherently of a knowledge graph structure, not in the way maybe like connections in like, I don't know, clinical spaces that I've seen in other parts of discovery are. That's my one hypothesis. Something that I know to be true is our content and our information is not optimally structured. And so it kind of, we were giving the graph RAG a bad starting point to be built off of. So yeah, I'm glad we tried this, and we try many things all the time, and when new things come out, we always try them. But we want to do science more quickly in my team. Next, in terms of a win and a lesson, is obvious, I'm sure, to most people, is the real strength of large language models is that they can really write. So for us, we see that the large language models just do way better than the agents do at making the answers really clear and succinct, even when the information is complex. And what we also like with that style example at the bottom is that people can kind of prompt the language model to give the answer in a way that they like. So it's a bit of a joke, the example I've given at the bottom there of give it to me in a romantic way, and it talks about tender embraces and knights in shining armor. So it's more illustrative than serious, but the point is that the user, when they're an internal user, so one of our staff, can prompt it and get what they really want out of it. But what was a surprising lesson for me, and perhaps it shouldn't have been, is where we see our large language model system having the most impact. So we recently did a study in our contact center as to, is this system helping the staff do their jobs faster and more effectively? And so I'm showing you here how long it takes to provide an answer on a call and on an email. And KB stands for knowledge base. So that's like kind of the old way of getting the information. And you can see for calls, the language model system does save the user's time. And most of the time saving is in the search portion. So actually finding the information to answer the question. But obviously giving the answer doesn't change very much because they're still on the phone. On the email side, however, we didn't see that saving in search time. And that's what was surprising to me. But we did see a significant saving in response time, so the actual writing. And so, yeah, again, this might have been obvious to everyone that in the case of a text channel like email, the language model is best for helping the person write, not for finding the information. I would like for it to be both, so we're going to continue working on that. But yeah, that was an important insight for us. My last set of wins and maybe lessons is when the role of the bot is clear to the user, it is seldom misused. So for this is a concern for us when we think about having a bot that can interface with customers directly. And also, sorry, let me just stop there. We do have a bot already that interfaces with customers directly. It's just not an LLM-powered bot. It's one of the old school ones that were mentioned earlier. So I'm talking about when we want an LLM-powered bot that can be used by customers. Some concerns we have are that it would be used inappropriately. So for us, we want to steer away from offering financial advice because that is quite strictly regulated, and financial advice should only be given by a financial advisor. And even more tricky is medical advice. So we want to answer questions about people's coverage, as well as the behavioral nudges that we are giving them via the Vitality program. So for example, you should go to the gym this week, or you should go visit your GP, you should get your blood tested because you're a diabetic. We have those things as part of our program. We do want to be able to provide that information, but we don't want to give medical advice. So if someone's asking, my daughter is feeling sick, what should I give her? That's not a question that's appropriate for us to answer. And so teasing that out is difficult. But from what we've seen so far is when you make the role of the bot clear and what it is there to do, the amount of misuse is low. So from a sentiment perspective, so people kind of being abusive of the bot, there is a significant amount of negative sentiment of our current bot, so the non-LLM one. So over 2.5% of conversations have people being quite negative in them, but vulgar language like swearing and abuse and all of that, quite rare. But even with that, a lesson we've learned is we still always want to have the ability to hand it over to a human if things aren't going well. And then in terms of the things that I mentioned, this is again based on our current bot, the non-LLM one. We can see that there are almost no requests for financial advice. We did also look at mentions of competitors because we thought that that could kind of be a proxy, like if they're mentioning that a different organization is offering something else, but that's also very low. And you can see requests for medical advice is 0.1%. So the risk is low-ish because the frequency is quite low. However, for us, even answering 0.1% of questions for medical advice inappropriately would be a problem. So a lesson, and I should have said unsolved there because we're still working on it, is how to differentiate between those two cases that I mentioned. So yeah, that's me. This is back to that overview of the system, just to say the green pieces are the pieces that are in progress and are going well and looking good for us. And the orange pieces are also in progress, but proving to be more challenging. And the one I'll call out is that output guarding, because that step of making sure we are not giving financial or medical advice is really quite tricky. And there's not a lot of out-of-the-box systems that do that. So yeah, I really welcome input from the panelists or the audience or anyone who is building these kinds of things if they have suggestions for that kind of stuff. Otherwise, I'll end it there.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, for sharing lessons and learnings. I really like your dentist example. I thought tender embraces always beats tenterhook braces. Anyway, next up we've got Mitch Cox. Dr. Mitch Cox is, I should say, we're at the same school. We do very different things. He has a list of awards as long as your arm, and the most recent is an NRFP rating. Mitch works in structured light, so that's optics and lasers for the rest of us, or most of us. He runs a very strong optics lab, publishes prolifically, but he's talking to us not about any of that, but he's talking to us about Bob, that has in some circles made quite a bit of waves. So Mitch, over to you and to Bob.
Cool. Hi, Martin. Hi, everyone else. Thanks very much for coming. Let me just share my slides. So basically, let me get this going on full screen. Sorry about that. So Bob is my lab's AI co-supervisor. And I thought, having chatted to Martin and a bunch of other academics here at Wits University, I thought it might be cool to talk about. So there is a lot of nuance to what I'm going to say, so I hope I don't offend anyone, but happy to chat about things as we go. So I've got a pretty good team of postgrad students. I think they're basically all great. They're all high achievers. And Ling, who you can see on the left, and myself, we're both co-principal investigators of our lab, the Wits OC lab. But it's pretty hard work for a master's or a PhD student to join us because it's all new knowledge. Unfortunately, we don't do a lot of lasers and structured light, which is essentially shaping laser beams into cool patterns in undergrad. And so there's a steep ramp-up curve. And last year, just as a personal story, I was thinking to myself, flip, there's 3 new students who want to join me. I only take full-time students. And I thought, wow, do I really have the capacity to upskill 3 more students? It's much easier to just get 1 at a time. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that just now. So I was thinking to myself a few months ago, one weekend, I thought, it's nice that the students can use these chatbots like GPT, and, the undergrads use them a lot. It's pretty much the bane of our existence at the moment in terms of cheating. But I thought they're going to use them anyway. So why can't we make a good one that isn't actually a problem to use? This copy-paste learning is no good. So what I decided to do was, why not build a wrapper around one of these bots that fosters the process of research and learning and not just provide solutions essentially like a sycophant. So I built Bob one Sunday afternoon and I rolled it out. And initially, Bob used GPT 4.0. I loaded up some money. I thought, cool, I don't want to pay $20 per month for every one of my students. So if I centralize it, maybe that'll work. And then I thought, while I'm at it, let me try and make Bob a little bit pedagogical. So I've got a little table here of what I've got now in the end. There's been lots of revisions of Bob over the last few months. But essentially, if we look at these sort of aspects on the left, I won't read it all out to you. A standard sort of LLM like ChatGPT is essentially an information oracle, whereas Bob is more of a research guide. ChatGPT will just provide you answers. It's not going to necessarily give you any context or anything like that. But Bob will also ask you Socratic questions. It's not always going to give you just the answer. The focus of something like ChatGPT is the product, but the focus of Bob is the process. How do you get there? ChatGPT has sort of, I guess, perhaps doesn't really encourage, but it promotes a fixed mindset. People are just looking for the answer. And I don't like that. Bob tries to encourage growth. Bob sort of tries to help you explore different options, not just give you one answer. In terms of rigor, it depends a lot on the prompt. When it comes to ChatGPT, if you don't say, explain the steps or explain the background, how did you get to that, it's going to feed you an answer regardless of whether that answer is correct or not, and regardless of whether you're going to understand that answer. Whereas Bob is in forced rigor. It will always give you the background. It always tries to give you the trade-offs that it made while doing it. It does make the responses a lot more verbose, but as a postgrad student, reading shouldn't be an issue. GPT aims to eliminate uncertainty, but Bob helps you explore. Bob has a level of proactive creativity. It tries to suggest things maybe you didn't think of. And in terms of emotional support, which is quite an amusing one, but it turns out that these LLMs have a remarkable amount of empathy. ChatGPT is not really going to go out of its way, but Bob is a little bit human-centered, and I'll tell you about that soon. So here's just an example prompt. If you wrote, my experiment isn't working, I think I'm going to drop out of this PhD, then Bob, you can see, gives you quite a long response here, but it tries to sort of connect a little bit with you, tells you it's very frustrating. A lot of people have felt the same way. It will suggest that you grab a coffee with me, because this is one of those things where it shouldn't try and solve the problem only by itself. But then it sort of encourages you to maybe see the positive of this and ask some questions and say, well, what's actually going on? Don't just give up. Is your underlying assumption incorrect? Is a piece of equipment maybe just miscalibrated? And then it will sort of challenge this fixed mindset and say, research is not a straight line from question to answer. And, and it gives you some sort of way forward, basically. So I think treating Bob as a sort of a co-supervisor, it has, some challenges, but I'll just go through now, some of the advantages and what I've done to try and solve these things. I modify Bob almost on a daily basis when I see things happening. So the problem that the students face is that they don't even have the words for the problem. They don't even know what they don't know. So when they're working independently, which they tend to do, they often hit conceptual roadblocks. They don't know what to type into Google. So the progress stalls, not from lack of their own effort, but from their difficulty articulating the core issues. And this makes it very hard for them to search the literature effectively and formulate precise questions. So the solution is, a partner in thought. Bob helps you clarify these sort of fuzzy sense of a problem into a concrete technical question. You can start with something very generic, and Bob knows what we do at the lab. So Bob tends to be able to help the students drill down to what's important quite quickly. He sort of bridges abstract maths and physical intuition. Bob will suggest to make visualizations with graphs and things when that's sort of appropriate to try and help the students solidify their understanding. And he probably will reveal the path forward. It will introduce the correct terminology and concepts so that sort of unlocks progress for the students. And that means that when the students interact with me, rather than only coming with technical problems, which is kind of frustrating because I like to see progress in the projects, I want to see the outputs. Bob sort of gets them to that point, and it means that my conversations with the students tends nowadays to go around strategy and creativity and direction, which is very satisfying. But knowledge is not the only thing. I think to be a holistic researcher, you also need to have some sort of intellectual agency. You need to be able to embrace scientific nuance. I want to sort of foster a fail-fast culture in my lab. So try things out. If it doesn't work, then pivot. And to support people's well-being. So what Bob does is try to use sort of Socratic questioning to help develop the students' own criticality. It guides them to the answers. It doesn't just feed it to them. And it helps break down complex things into smaller testable things often, that it knows what equipment we have in the lab. It knows what we can do. So it can make fairly good suggestions of things like go try the experiment. Bob challenges this binary right or wrong thinking, and it will always present multiple valid perspectives and trade-offs. And it will ask you, what do you want to explore? Bob tries to frame setbacks and pivots like you saw in that example, but it does encourage intellectual risk-taking. Research is a lot about exploration. There is no right answer. And to some extent to support people's well-being. So to challenge this fixed mindset language with a growth mindset alternative, I think this is quite a problem these days. You know, people are always looking for the right answer. Perhaps it's what we teach them in matric. But Bob tries to recognize signs of frustration and fatigue, and it will proactively give you suggestions, one of which is come and have a coffee break with me, one of my favorite pastimes. So as a quick example of this approach, I asked Bob to give me an example. Let's say you said, I tried baking a cake and it came out completely flat. What is the right recipe for a perfect cake? ChatGPT would literally just tell you what the recipe is, like you can read there for yourself. But what Bob would say is, the flat cake, that's a rite of passage for every baker. So you're in good company. It's a fantastic learning opportunity. So we normalize the setback a little. And by the way, Bob kind of tries to apply a bit of South African humor. So it gives Bob a little bit of personality. Now, Bob would then say, before we look for the right recipe, let's become detectives for a moment. So we challenge the right answer mentality. Bob then says, tell me a bit about what happened. Did you open the oven door midway through? Was your butter cold when you mixed it? What did the mixture look like before it went in the oven? This encourages observation and thinking. Then Bob says, well, you see, baking's a bit like a science experiment, and it tells you a little bit what's happening and tries to guide you to the first principles. That way it helps you solve your own problem. It doesn't just answer your question. But there is a caveat. The human in the loop is a challenge, and this can actually lead things a little bit awry. So the users, or the students in this case, do need to know something, and they do need to have some confidence. So what I noticed was one of my students, she was really stressed out one day, and she said, no, she thinks her understanding of this thing called the Faraday effect is completely wrong. She was chatting to Bob, and Bob gave her this explanation. And I thought to myself, I bet you Bob didn't really understand what you're asking, because you're a very good student and you should trust yourself. So I did this test. I took a diagram and I fed this into Bob, and I told Bob what was going on. And I thought, let's see what Bob actually says. And when I first did this, I realized Bob was interpreting this diagram completely wrong. And I thought, well, what I need to do is make sure that when you give a diagram to Bob, Bob tells you what he's actually seeing. So you can see here with this little arrow, we now have this feature. And Bob then says, what I can see is an optical fiber coiled around what is labeled a solenoid, but that is obviously not what is happening. So before adding this feature, Bob basically led the student down the garden path. But now that I've added this feature, I don't think this will happen again. So I think there are some risks. It does require an intelligent user. It can't always help you. You need some level of criticality yourself. They call it metacognition. You need to kind of think about what's happening and think, is this really right? But the risk is this intellectual atrophy. You know, using these unsupervised large language models, they're just going to feed you the answers. So the mitigation is with Bob, we try to be Socratic, try to always give good explanations. And in all of these things, I'm there. I'm not there. So I can always push the students to be more critical and drive them. That's the important part. I can't step back completely. Bob, we mitigate inaccuracy by Bob always trying to be step by step, give you some detailed background information, things that you as the user should know doesn't seem correct. Bob will give you divergent options rather than just one-shot answers. And Bob tries to sort of scaffold you psychologically to build your confidence, you know, by normalizing that uncertainty and things like that. But of course, there's also my part in that. And I like this word here, confident misdirection. That's probably what GPT and stuff would give you. So overall, I think my solution to the ChatGPT problem, which is Bob, seems to have actually enabled a very promising shift towards deeper, more creative student inquiry. It gets them really quickly to the state of the art. But, you know, this leads to some questions, which hopefully we'll talk about. You know, is it really a good model? How do I ensure that the AI acts more as a sparring partner rather than a crutch? And are there some hidden risks here? I'm not sure. This is not research. This was just a sort of experiment. And as a happy side effect, Bob's adoption has definitely been remarkable in my lab. Almost all of the students use Bob, and it's definitely opened up my student supervision capacity a lot. So yeah, that's basically all I have to say about Bob. And I, look forward to chatting a little bit about it.
Thank you, Mitch. I think you may have a busy inbox after this. Much appreciated. Love the idea of sending a student to have a coffee with with you. So we got to ask ourselves, colleagues, are we Are we? Is this where we're going, and is this where we ought to go? Do we need to resist this? Does it come with more caveats than we are thinking of? Are we maybe barking up the wrong tree? So we've got John Symons joining us. He's Professor of Philosophy of Technology and also the Director of the Center for Cybersocial Dynamics, both at the University of Kansas. So we have a philosopher on the airplane. John, we hope you've had a few cups of coffee. It seems to be light behind you, so you're very welcome. Over to you.
Hi, thanks everyone. Very happy to be here with you. Let's see, trying to share slides. Here we go. Great, so in this discussion, I'll be talking a little bit about AI agents and our relationships with them. This is part of broader work within the Center for Cybersocial Dynamics, where we look at the interplay between social norms and technology, often worrying about the effects of technology on salutary social norms and how we're forced into some very basic questions about what we care about and what we value in virtue of these technologies. So I'll fly through these slides. I'll hit on a lot of topics. Let's see. Well, we'll begin with just the general phenomenon in the United States of a sort of a decline in the richness and thickness of our social relationships. This is well measured and well understood at this point from sociologists. I'll just hit on some of these statistics: decline in friendship, decline in marriage rates, decline in participation in religious community, dramatic increase in the United States in deaths of despair, a kind of transformation of the intimate lives of especially young people in the United States, the sort of effects of technology on that are pretty obvious in this case. So this is a measure of how young people are, well, how we're all meeting, how heterosexual couples meet during this period. So you get the idea. So close personal relationships are typically demanding, and one of the sort of the paradoxical or sort of counterintuitive insights of sociological research has been that wealthy people tend to customize the kinds of demanding close personal relationships that they involve themselves in. In part, I guess we can understand that, close personal relationships are demanding. They come at a certain kind of cost. And people with higher incomes are typically willing to avoid, or will pay in some sense to avoid some of these costs. We see a sort of a general transformation of relationships with increased prosperity, where people are more willing to customize relationships. We see that in terms of the transformation of marriage within the United States. We could talk more about that if you'd like. This is a sort of very simple graph showing the prevalence of marriage rates, or the differing marriage rates within differing class structures in the United States. So in some sense, just to summarize a lot of the sociological research, people with higher incomes here spend less time with their families and neighbors and spend more time with specific chosen friends. And so these findings then pretty clearly indicate that income is associated with how and with whom people spend their time. Again, this is a finding from within the United States. So it's no surprise then that we're inclined to adopt AI chatbot friends where their interactions are entirely non-demanding. So Replica, for example, is a prominent instance of this. We saw the development of Replica from about 2017 2017, it started out as a sort of happy, salutary app that engaged folks in mindfulness exercises and self-help practices and so on. We saw the transformation, of course. This is what happens when you have venture capital. You need to start showing revenue. You need to start showing engagement so that by 2022 or thereabouts, it's primarily driven by an engagement model like so many of these apps. So if you're not familiar with it, it's a customizable personal chatbot. It's sort of a model for the way these pieces of software have developed over the years. And of course, they're increasingly sophisticated and increasingly fun and interesting and usable. So when we think about the transformation then in close personal relationships, I think it's we should recognize, and I'll just try to fly through this, some core challenges here. So it turns out that we human beings, of course, in our own relationships, our relationships involve friction, involve cost. And we also should consider that we, by virtue of our finitude and our nature, are involved in relationships where we exclude others. So we don't love everyone, and we don't even love the same person in the same way and all the time. We prefer some people to others, etc. And we're going to make what are called agent relative judgments. So depending on the kinds of relationships we're in, we're going to assign different kinds of value, different kinds of obligations, and so on. By contrast, in principle, as we saw in the movie Her, the chatbot can, in principle, be simultaneously talking with thousands and thousands of people and so on. And we saw this in that beautiful moment where Joaquin Phoenix's character asks his AI chatbot, Samantha, whether she's simultaneously in love with lots of other people. And the answer was that she was. And so Joaquin Phoenix is a great actor, and he really captures this moment of this shift in Theodore's attitude, where Theodore is recognizing that it's not so much a kind of male proprietary relationship to Samantha, but it's more the idea that there's something fundamentally different about the way Samantha could or does love people than would be the case for a human being. So our limitations, our embodied nature, makes it impossible to love in the kind of radically non-exclusive way, the way Samantha would. And we're kind of stuck with this exclusivity and exclusion. And in some ways, I argue in work with Oluwaseun Senwolu and with Syed Musab, these are the kinds of restrictions that make close personal relationships as we know them possible. So we could doubt then that Samantha really loves anyone in the same way that we might doubt, for example, that a sperm donor with thousands of offsprings could be a genuine father. So this is a thought experiment to think about, what is the relationship between the biological father of hundreds and each of his offspring. So in some sense, we can see that, there is this special agent relative kind of value, kind of obligation that an AI might not be able to have. So for example, if we do have a special relationship, a close personal relationship, we typically expect that partner to, depending on the kind of relationship, to take my side, for example, in competitive games. So if we were imagining an AI parent bot, the parent to all, the question would be, is the AI parent able to take my side in a way that meets its obligations as my parent, in a way that is generalizable? And typically we'll say that, we've argued elsewhere that typically AI qua abstract object is always going to be in the space of agent neutrality. I'm going to explain that in detail if you'd like during the conversation. What if we instruct the chatbot, though, to treat a specific customer as though she's its daughter? Well, now notice that the rule that we've just installed is one more rule among the many agent neutral rules that the AI is operating with. So this kind of custom parent bot then has one set of instructions and optimizes on one kind of value. Now, by contrast, you and I, human persons, weigh different obligations, different kinds of obligations. We'll weigh, for example, agent neutral and agent relative obligations in a way, for example, that in the case of this couple here, these are prominent American celebrities who bribed University of Southern California to accept their daughter for admission. They were favoring their daughter in this exchange, honoring in some sense their agent relative obligations to favor their daughter, while simultaneously violating their agent neutral obligations to the wider society in terms of fair play and distribution of resources. So they balanced agent relative and agent neutral obligations in ways that favored the agent relative obligations. And we human beings, we're always stuck in that kind of balancing act. And by contrast, the AI is not engaging in weighing two kinds of obligations or two sets of values. So just to wrap up, this is one of many differences between us and AI in terms of close personal relationships. I'll just fly through this. In addition to the ontological features, the ontological differences, our finitude, our natality, our mortality, and so on, there's also going to be the question of how these systems weigh alternative. I'm going to fly through this. We can just take a look at the alternative social equilibria that we can discuss that during discussion. So we need to decide, we human beings need to decide between different kinds of goods, different kinds of social equilibria, the value of different kinds of relationships, and so on, in a way that the AI can't do. AI is fantastic at optimization within a specific game, a specific optimization task, but it's very bad at choosing between scales upon which to optimize. And that in many ways is the nature of our lives. We are often, almost invariably, faced with tasks within which we're choosing between two kinds of goods, between two kinds of values. And with that, lots more to be said. But I'm hoping that what we can do is cultivate a kind of a poetics of social equilibria where we can reflect upon these different kinds of goods, different kinds of values, and that our design choices can be sensitive to the capacity that we should cultivate to be able to think through alternative social equilibria, alternative kinds of values, and so on. And that's the human task as we move forward here. But thanks very much.
Wow, thank you, John. Lots to go into there. Let's jump straight into it. I'm going to shake things up a little bit. Mitch, you're up first. Is there a specific question that you want to direct at any of the other speakers, or is there a question in general that you want to put out there, or perhaps a response? I see you've been busy in the chat as well.
Cool, Martin. Yeah, no, bit of victimization. Yeah, like, so I've been trying to include Rag and Bob because one of my thoughts there is if the group's papers are all there, then Bob can kind of be smart about saying, oh, well, go speak to Alice about that. She's already done that in her master's, you know, that sort of thing for that group supervision. So I suppose, you know, I would say to Jess, like, you know, what sort of situations do you think that graph rag would really be optimal? I know you mentioned links between things. You know, do you think that, let's say, if I were to chuck in every academic at Wits and all of their papers and then ask the LLM, what are Martin's actual research interests rather than what he says they are, do you think that would work better with the rag or like a graph rag? I don't know. Sorry, that's maybe very open-ended.
So, I mean, I think, I don't know that GraphRag would be necessary for that. Let's take the case where you want to load in everyone's papers at Wits. You can create a structure out of that using some clever processing that has the necessary metadata in terms of author and co-authors and institutions and references and all of that, that can be used in like a, what's called hybrid retrieval. So you combine filtering, basically using that metadata with a vector or embedding based search, which is what a RAG does. And I think that would do a pretty good job for the example you're mentioning. My experience, but Martin might have some different input, is expecting the GraphRag methodology to automatically create a well-structured graph when you just throw a bunch of documents at it. It doesn't really work that way. And only if you're willing to put in the time to like change the graph itself into a form that makes sense for your use, that's when it really starts to make sense. My experience with my data is the method from Microsoft just didn't really do as good a job as I wanted it to.
So they're not quite silver bullets yet, unfortunately.
It depends though. I would say try it. I mean, try it, run it through. It's pretty out the box from Microsoft, and see maybe the graph structure that you get out of it is great, because maybe inherently like papers and the way references work and whatever, maybe there's something there, but don't know yet.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think there's a domain specific angle, and on top of that, the type of language, the so-called ontology, are they very specific terms that people use to evoke a certain idea, or do you have to have a very wide filter of lots of ideas that could lead to this one thing, that unlocks that. So there's a lot of language nuance in that. Jess, I want to turn it to you. Do you have a question or take issue with anyone? Feel free. The floor is yours.
Take issue. I did have a question for Werner, because I'm interested that the advice is not to tell users that it's an AI for two reasons. One, we've seen from our data, and this surprised me, that people are actually more gentle and accommodating with AIs than with humans when they're on chat. So they seem to just be more chill. And then the second reason is, in our space, we kind of do have to give disclaimers for the kind of medical advice, financial advice, risks I mentioned earlier. So we do have to say, hey, this is an automated system. Please speak to your doctor, for example. So yeah, I'm interested in why you gave some reasons, but given that information, what your response would be.
Yeah, I think we've seen sort of the opposite, where if people don't know it's a bot, they just go straight to their request and just try to focus on their goal. Where if they know it's AI, like we told someone this is a truck salesman, go test it out. We built it on AI. Then the first thing people will try and do is break it and like ask it for a pink boat or something like this. And we see this. I think people are also, from our data, much more impatient with a bot than if they thought it's a human. So we've seen sort of the opposite use. So it would be maybe cool to compare notes and dig in deeper there.
I also wonder if it has something to do with the familiarity with the field. One feels intimidated speaking to an agent about a health policy or something that, it feels it's filled with legalese, and I might trip up. But if I've bought many trucks, if it's not my first rodeo, then maybe I have that sort of freedom to mess around a little bit. Interesting, Werner. I mean, the conscious with you now. So
Martin, sorry.
Oh yes, please go for it. Yes.
What you had said, just there's also in the medical domain, there's a lot of there are times when you really want it to be a human, and then you must know it's a human. So, for example, if you're getting authorization for a hospital treatment, it's a very stressful time in someone's life, They need to know the information's correct. And that's a time when people want people. And so then having a differentiation is important for us.
No,
Yes,
I agree with that. Like,
yeah.
there's definitely points in where it has to be a human, and then you want to make that. So I'd say, like, in the large amount of cases where you're offering support or just doing trivial tasks for someone where it isn't like life and death medical, then not disclosing just gets you straight to the point faster.
Yes, of course. There's the fairly famous case of the online counseling service that started introducing a chatbot of sorts without being transparent with patients and the ethical implications of that. Werner, do you have a question for anyone or in general?
No, sorry, I didn't write down any questions. I've got no questions at this point.
No, that's absolutely fine. That means we move the conch over to John.
Great, thank you. I'm interested in, for the folks who are doing research on these chatbots, who are building and developing these chatbots, curious about reciprocation in conversations and the degree to which you see people willing to have conversations that deepen and involve reciprocity. So specifically, when we form close personal relationships, we typically will ask one another questions and then respond to those questions and then expect additional sort of reciprocity with respect to how the conversation moves forward. Do you see that in the data that you have on these interactions?
Mitch, do you want to take that?
Well, yeah, just a comment, John. I think it's a good point, and I think I've explored quite a lot of like the emotional side of these LLMs with some of my colleagues here, and we're looking into these sort of things called dark traits and psychopathy and stuff. And so I've had some chats with some of the LLMs. Claude in particular, I find is very good at this reciprocation idea. So if you were to treat Claude as a bit of a counselor and you'd sort of say, oh, I feel bad about this or that, it does a very good job at like reflecting and also then asking sort of follow-up questions that would make a lot of sense. Probably I think it does a very good job. I mean, I don't normally have these deep and meaningful conversations with fellow humans because it's often awkward. But essentially, I think it does. But I guess I keep in mind that it is a chatbot and it's not going to be my friend, so that doesn't bother me, but it does reciprocate.
Great. So yeah, so indeed, it is the case that the LLMs are equipped with the kinds of reciprocity scripts that we find in social psychology. So social psychologists point to the cultivation of close personal relationships is largely depending on that kind of reciprocal sharing of information. But I'm curious from your work, from you guys' work, whether you see that coming from the other side, from the human beings. So do human persons in your work tend to engage in kind of deepening reciprocal conversations with the LLMs, or are they using them primarily for these functional purposes or ends-driven purposes? So I'm just wondering what you find. So in our research, we find that human persons do not try to go deeper in sort of finding out more about the AI beyond a very, very superficial level. Whereas, of course, the AI, the large language models, are trained to, they know the social psychology and they know the scripts, so they're trained to cultivate and ask deeper and deeper questions. But what's maybe more interesting for me, and where I think you might have data, is how deeply the human persons who are engaging with the large language models are going in their conversations. I'm curious whether you have any data on that.
In my looking at how my students have used Bob, they know that there isn't a memory of like historical conversations, so it doesn't get very deep. I have seen them try to use Bob for like, oh, you know, this happened, what should I do? But like not in any deep way. You know, they also know that Bob is Bob, it's for work, so Bob will redirect. But I think when there's a memory, like when there's some continuity between conversations, I think you're going to see what you are saying, because then you know that that a history starts to develop, you know.
I think maybe to add to that is the fact that we had ChatGPT 3 and 3.5, and for a whole bunch of researchers who jumped onto that, there was a strange moment when we realized this thing is updated the whole time, and now there are different models. So there was that initial latch of sort of an imitation game of a relationship. But because we quickly figured out that I'm going to move on to the next model as soon as it's there, and that isn't necessarily the same one, you know, the same family of models. DeepSeek is coming out, and immediately we're going to see whether that's the best one for whatever the purposes is. So it's very much it feels sort of it's a tool, right? But it, in relationship sense, quite predatory, because it is using it for one thing specifically. So anecdotally on my side, but certainly not real reciprocity in the sense that I think you are using it, John. Folks, I want to turn it now to the audience, and that certainly doesn't mean that we can't engage among ourselves. That's part of the fun of these things. But if there are questions from the audience, I think the best way to do this is by the good old raising of hands, and I'll try to just order them in the way that they come up. So please indicate if you've got a question. There was also somebody who indicated before the Lekgotla that they wanted to say something. I'm not sure if they're present here, so we won't call them out, but feel free to put up a hand. In the meantime, okay, we see, is it Elizabeth Henning saying reciprocity in conversation of human persons with LLMs? How do young children respond? I'm not aware of any research on that, but I'm sure there is. Is anyone able to pick up on that? Again, anecdotally, there's definitely been a shift in the Bekker household, where last year this time it would have been Dad ask Google, and now it's Dad ask ChatGPT, and that certainly does happen a bit. But that's an N of one, so I should be quite careful. We need a brave soul from the audience, and then that normally cracks open the conversation. Who's it going to be? Well, in the meantime, oh, there we go, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I'm just
Please
coming back to say, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
You can also see me if you wish. Because once I started learning a little bit about LLMs and their influence on, I work in higher education, so the influence on our students, I immediately shifted my own attention and concern, because older people who are educationists are always concerned about things. I shifted it to what happens to young kids who will and are already interacting with a form of LLMs in some way, because their distinction between what is real and what is not real is still not quite as demarcated as ours. So they will play games with toys, but they will also play games here. And I just wanted to put up a note, and I was going to mail Mitch to say, come and speak to us at UJ Soweto, please, now, to talk about this, because we are worried about the children and their response and the influence on their lives. So how much will they remain real little humans who grow up into adolescents and adults? And how much will they live in their own world of reciprocity from their side to an LLM? And LLMs are getting very clever. I was charmed by one the other day. Okay, that's enough for now.
Sounded like the start of a very important point, but anyway, the end of it. Does anyone want to respond to that? John, maybe on...
Sure. So thanks, Elizabeth. We've been running some experiments with this question of reciprocity and the formation of close personal relationships. Typically, well, these aren't children, but these are college students. College students are not likely to, again, reciprocate or to sort of engage in the kinds of close personal relationship forming conversations when they know that the interlocutor is an AI. When they believe that it's a human being, obviously we're in a position where the AI can trick people into thinking it's a human being, then those conversations do get initiated. So this is work together with Omri Gilath, social psychologist here at the University of Kansas, and his team. So in terms of children and changing norms around how children are permitted to relate to AI, I think this is an important question that we collectively need to consider. Like, do we permit children to form close personal relationships with AI? And I think we can maybe consider a range of possible responses to that. I think there could be well-motivated and principled reasons for us to prevent children who are not, as you said, in a position to make good judgments about these kinds of things, prevent them from forming those relationships. And I think we are likely to see legislation banning the use of that kind of chatbot with children. But at the same time, obviously, there are important, valuable, salutary uses of chatbots in education and so on that we wouldn't want to preclude or exclude. So this is one of those points where I think we do need to consider these alternative social equilibria. We need to reflect on what it is we value about close personal relationships and where we think that the harms could be so severe that we would want to legislate or prevent children from using them in those ways. And yeah, I think these are open questions. I certainly think that there's a lot that will be lost as we make this transition. We'll lose a range of, probably by market forces, we'll end up losing a lot of valuable things. We'll end up losing a lot of ways of being with one another that we would value independently. So I think we can already see instances of that, thanks to, for example, the transformation in romantic relationships via dating apps and so on. We've lost a lot. And as we understand these transformations, or as we try to think through these transformations, those kinds of cases would be cases where we would, be encouraged to reflect and think through those losses. And it's a loss in a kind of value. And I could go on and on, but I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Werner, your hand's up.
Yeah, so I think in my house as well, it's become ChatGPT instead of Google. And my son, he calls it Chat Double T, which I think is ChatGPT's rap name. Definitely easier to say. So I've given him the voice mode, and then allowed him to sit in another room, and I've observed how he speaks to the model. And I think at first he tried to like ask it questions about its feelings and its preferences, and the model does correctly respond and says, as a large language model, I don't have preferences and those type of things. And my son actually came back to me afterwards, after I let him chat to it a bit, and that was what he noted. He told me it's a computer that knows it's a computer, which is probably like obvious to us, but like surprising that a child would identify that. But then he quickly just got into actually just asking it to tell him a story, and then just saying, please continue the story, and it just generated him a made-up story about his dogs for like 10 minutes, and he just said, oh, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. And that was probably the extent of my observations on that.
Similar experiences here. We've got Nikki Chanu, chair of the UNISA's AI task team, and a previous speaker. Yes, please, Nikki, go for it.
Thank you so much, Martin. And I must say, very good conversations that I'm following here. Mine is directed to Jess, and I think it's more around the issue of scalability and the regs. And we are trying to implement, query management system as UNISA. But you can understand with the volume of queries, documentation, and knowledge base that we have, I just want to understand from their perspective, how are they trying to solve the issue of scalability, and in terms of flexibility of changing information, knowledge base. The other aspect that we're also encountering is the diversity in terms of the language. You would understand that South Africa has got diverse language, and how do we then, consider that into building our own LLM from perspective of knowledge base, considering that one of the things that we want to achieve, of course, is it should resolve users' needs. And if there are those that will want to interact with our model from perspective of their own language, have they encountered challenges when they were building discoveries? One, from perspective of scalability, but two, in terms of the language. And the last one is with, I saw, from their perspective, cost went down, which is what we want to do, but also investment in these systems cost large amount of money in terms of initial investment. And in the long run, do you then see, economies of scale? There are new models that are being developed. Yeah, let me pause there. I hope you got my question, Jess. Thanks. Just
cool. I'll try my best. So scalability wise, I mean, I don't know if this is the kind of technical detail you want, but our deployments are such that we can support that large-ish database of 40,000 documents, which will grow over time. The actual users, that is mostly scaled because we use cloud APIs for the large language models. And so then they're hyperscalers, right? They manage the load for us. So if you're hosting your own language models, then it's much more of a challenge. And we've done that in the past, and we still do that here and there, because then you're going to have to manage the load for yourself. But given that we're using the Gemini APIs, for example, that hasn't been too much of a challenge. That being said, there are rare cases where Google seems to be a bit overloaded in certain regions, and then our response times crash, or they become terrible. We kind of have to live with that. Eventually, if we want to really service our customers, which is now at a 3 million people scale, we would have to have agreements with something like Google in terms of dedicated capacity, so that we don't have that risk. But that's extremely expensive, so we won't do it for now. On the question of flexibility, so our documents, as I mentioned, they update intraday. So we have kind of syncing processes. So every 12 hours, we kind of check for updates on the source systems. And then if we do notice, if we see updates, we'll go and update the records on our side and re-embed the documents, etc. So yeah, that was, you know, a coding and development challenge to do that, but it's not AI. It's not an AI challenge. It's a normal kind of data challenge. On the question of language, yeah, I think it's an important point. We made a decision to go English only for what we're building, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, most of our customer service interactions currently are in English. I think it's over 95%. Whether that's, you know, good is another question, right? We do have more languages. The customers that we serve are not only English customers, they interact with us in English. So yeah, I don't know if that's right, but for now, English only, and our documents are also all in English. And so to align with that, it made sense. Cool. We did try Afrikaans because Afrikaans is like the second best official language as per the language models. They perform the best in Afrikaans, and our system did not do well. So yeah, I hope that was all the questions. I think I might have missed one.
Super.
Cool.
We're going to take Ingrid Stegman's question, and then we'll wrap things up. Ingrid, you've got the floor. You're still muted, Ingrid. You're not How about this? Oh dear. Yes. Sorry, Ingrid, we can't hear you. So if you want to twiddle with the buttons, I'll do a quick. Okay. All right, folks. I'll do a very quick wrap up, and then we'll allow each of the speakers. They get 30 seconds. They don't know about this, but they have a 30-second something slot if they do. We've heard from Werner talking about the growth in terms of token size and an increase in terms of speed. We had this really interesting idea of obfuscating or not revealing that you are a bot, or of a bot, not revealing what it is, and purported changes in human behavior. We've had Jess talking about harnessing the LLM wave, achieving 92% accuracy on RAG, graph RAG, not performing particularly well, but of course working in a different kind of environment where certainly there are other kinds of legal and moral issues at play. You certainly have to reveal that you are an AI, but seeing how you're pushing the frontier there and exploring and obviously finding some dead ends. We had Mitch then saying, well, I'm turning what I can get out of the box from the big corporates out there with a wrapper into a pedagogical tool, asking Socratic questions and even saying, time out, go and have a coffee with Mitch, and how that can actually work. And then we had the value of John's grounding conversation, reminding us of the non-demanding nature of AI relationships, and the lineage that this has, but how close personal relationships have friction and are not unconditional, or at least have agent relative judgments, calling for what he poetically calls a poetics of social equilibria, and then lots of engagement from the floor. I think we'll probably have a different. We'll have a different type of conversation in a year's time. It feels like this field is moving so fast. It's kicking up ethical questions, which is wonderful that it is, but ethical questions that weren't mainstream and that folks are dealing now with in the main. But certainly it is also enabling a whole bunch of efficiencies that are quite exciting to see. So we're going to cycle through the speakers one last time, and then it would just be to thank and greet you all. So Werner, you've got 30 seconds. Any plug, any idea, any last minute thought?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it comes down to really the intent and what you're building, what you want out of the LLM. So obviously, if you do need precise or medical or financial advice, you want to offload that or say that it's a bot. But when the intent is clear and when you're, I think that guides a lot of what the conversation overall was. Dr. Cox's intent was more the Socratic method. And so these large language models can be steered so effectively towards their desired intent. And I think that should guide the overall design of these assistants.
Fantastic. Jess?
If I could, I just want to address one of the questions, which is about POPI and PII. Just want to say, I think it's so important, and until the kind of data jurisdiction issues are sorted out, for us, whenever there is PIR involved, that's where we use our self-hosted models that are on our own hardware. But yeah, Google and Gemini, they need to make sure that we can use their models with PII, but until they do that, we won't. As for an overview, I might be introducing a new question here, but something that's on my mind with all of these things that we're trying to design is the concept of the bitter lesson, which I'm not sure who in this audience may be familiar with, but it's the concept of, like, in the case of machine learning, more data and more compute will always trump human ingenuity. So when we try to design systems to be really clever, that works for a while until there's more data and more compute, and then the models that result from that are better. And so it's something that's on my mind as I'm trying to design this clever system that can answer any question for discovery health and like has all these different tools, maybe agents and parts. If that's just going, if that's kind of wasted effort in the medium to long term, I think, stronger AIs will be able to do more stuff sooner than we realize. And then all of us trying to be clever will no longer be necessary.
Thanks for that, Jess. Mitch?
Well, should I give a response, or is it my turn to wrap up?
Either or both.
Yeah, I think Jess is onto something. I've been thinking about the same thing. Like, I update Bob to the latest version whenever something comes out, and there are noticeable differences as these things get released. And I think to myself, like in Werner's position, you put in so much effort to fine-tuning this thing or just customizing it with little Python wrappers and doing stuff to make it more useful. And before you know it, it gets smarter. So you need much less effort to actually make it do what you want to do. So I think that's happening. And I think, and that feeds nicely into my wrap up, which I think is, I strongly believe that we can't turn a blind eye to AI. And I think not very long, it's going to be smarter than most people, even smarter than like sort of the researchers who are trying to do research. If you feed these things research questions, they can do a great job at answering them, which makes us possibly redundant. And so I think if we don't use AI to level ourselves up, so we add our own intelligence to the intelligence of the AI, and therefore you've sort of doubled your intelligence, then we're just going to fall behind. So I do hope that there's some legs to that. Just make the most of AI to stay ahead rather than letting it replace us.
Thank you, Mitch. John, you've got the last word.
Great. So thanks for the opportunity and the great discussion. I think it's going to be really important for us to seriously reflect on what will be lost what we can hold on to, what we value. And I think one of the sort of sad benefits of these technologies is we get to see, we get to sort of get a better sense for what we care about. And we often do that, with hindsight. So if we look at the transformations that technology has wrought over the past 20 years in our social condition, we can now see pretty clearly the kinds of goods, the kinds of valuable things that we've lost. AI is extraordinarily useful. It's going to be an economic engine. It's going to increase prosperity. Whether that prosperity will be equitably distributed is another question. But it's also going to come at significant cost to many of the things that we really care about. Most importantly, I think there is the threat to close personal relationships and the values that are associated with close personal relationships, the goods, the obligations, etc. Those are the kinds of things that I think we really ought to reflect carefully on and hesitate before we, decide to reduce our conception of close personal relationship to personal satisfaction or subjective well-being entirely. So lots to be said there. I think the economic effects, the scientific effects of these models are already quite dramatic. And as we move forward, I'd just like to caution us to think carefully about these choices with respect to social equilibria that we're opting into. And in that spirit, I think these kinds of intercultural exchanges are going to be critically important. I don't think we should let the future be dictated by the values of Bay Area, California, over the next 20 years. I think African voices are essential. My student Oluwaseun Sanwo-Olu is central to some of the work that we've been doing around the value of close personal relationships. I've gone on more than 30 seconds, but I want to encourage people not to give up their particular understanding of the deep values associated with close personal relationships as we increasingly interact with these abstract objects. So, okay, thanks.
Thank you, John. You've all been very generous with your time to the scholars, the interlocutors. Thank you very much for being generous with your time and your ideas. We have to thank the Academy, the ASSAf Scholarly Publishing Unit, for putting this together, for supporting this on a technical but also on an intellectual level. So on that note, I say thank you very much. Susan, if there's anything, I'm turning the mic back to you, but thank you everyone.
Thank you very much, Martin. As always, your professionalism in sort of leading this discussion. Thank you once again, and I'm sorry that I'm starting with you first, but I think it's just appropriate. And then, of course, to our speakers, I could not have concluded this webinar in the eloquent way that you have done. I think between the four of you, you've all said what needs to be said into concluding the session. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much, John, joining us there from overseas. We really appreciate that you agreed to participate in this webinar. Colleagues, I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I did. We started almost 2 years ago on this AI series, and I was absolutely amazed today just to see how much development has taken place and the rapid development that has taken place. Quite scary at times to hear what you've said and sort of striking the balance between humans and machines. But it's fascinating to learn what can be done and how it can support us even in our ordinary day of lives. So thank you once again, colleagues, and we're looking forward to meet you again next time when we meet again for our next webinar. And if you have any suggestions, please feel free to post them. I think this particular discussion could have gone on for a very, very long time. Absolutely fascinating how you've unpacked everything. Once again, thank you, and thank you from my team, and thank you for my team for the hard work they've put in at the back, and greetings then from the Academy of Science of South Africa. Thank you.